Welcome to Customer Value Cast, a podcast dedicated to helping you acquire, retain, and expand more customers by putting measurable value at the heart of your customer lifecycle. Join our host, Ross Fulton, founder and CEO of ValueWise, as he dives deep into how recurring revenue businesses are maximizing their growth and valuations with the industry's leading experts and pioneers.
Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Customer Value Cast, the show dedicated to putting measurable value at the heart of your customer lifecycle so that your business can retain and expand more customers. Today, joined by Mark Reynolds from Digital Realty. Very excited for this conversation. We're going to get into some topics that I think are very pertinent and relevant to any recurring revenue enterprise today, but Digital Realty and Mark have got a very interesting angle and perspective on some of these subjects. But Mark, thank you for joining today.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here and have a good conversation with you, Ross.
Absolutely. So for you, Mark, in terms of who is Mark Reynolds, but also for anyone that hasn't maybe come across Digital Realty today, maybe introduce yourself and what the business does.
Yeah, so Mark Reynolds, Senior Vice President, Global Customer Operations at Digital Realty, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. Have been here pretty much my entire life, with the exception of university. I have three kids. And throughout my career, I've really been in two kind of experience areas. One would be around the sales experience. So how do we enable sales with the best possible training processes and systems to help them be better at what they do? And then the other one is the customer experience. So how do we create an insanely great customer experience with amazing outcomes and value? And where the two really dovetail quite nicely is that the sales experience is really a first part of the customer journey. And that's the customer experience. So you need to ensure that it's set up for success. And that's easier for the seller to sell and for the buyer to buy. So Digital Realty, what is Digital Realty? I get that question a lot. So simply said, we deliver the world's largest data center platform. We have 300 data centers in 25 plus countries, 6 continents, and more than 4,200 customers. And what we're doing is we're the meeting place where we bring companies and data together. And what do we do in these data centers is really provide the space, the power, the cooling, security, and the interconnections to enable digital business, working from home, AI, social media, the public cloud, driverless vehicles, and space missions. So lots of other use cases as well. It's a very fun and interesting space to be in, and it's been a very good one to be in during the last couple of years as the pandemic has gone and or has come and gone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so take us a bit deeper into the actual business model of Digital Realty, because I think I'm right in thinking that the business itself is a REIT, or REIT, or however people like to pronounce that. So, i.e., a real estate sort of investment trust. Is that the acronym?
You got it.
Take us a bit deeper into that, and then sort of your contract structures as well. Just because I want to highlight for everyone listening that there is a certain distinct flavor of business model that Digital Realty has, which has some very interesting parallels, but isn't your classic B2B software subscription licensing model that is often featured on this show and talked about on this show. Or there's some nuances here which I think are super interesting to dive into.
Yeah, you bet. So I mean, we are a REIT, real estate investment trust, and that's how we started. And when we started it, what we did was built and operated these massive data centers for customers to come in. It's kind of like almost like a server farm. They'd come in and buy the space because it was easier for us to build for them than for them to build. And how we started was we would create leases. I mean, truly real estate, right? And we actually called our customers a long time ago, actually, even up until right when I joined back in January 2017, tenants. They were tenants because they were, had a lease and signed with us. So, and what we do with them is we have it's an annual release. We have, of course, we bill monthly, but it's really a annual recurring revenue that we look at. And initially, these leases were like 7 to 10 years, really long. And then what we've done is we've acquired some companies, which is more around kind of smaller footprint space. And those leases or and contracts are more like 3 years, just because they're smaller footprint. Customers come and go a lot quicker. So it's a very interesting kind of place to be with these long contracts and somewhat shorter contracts.
Yep. No, super helpful, super helpful. And I think that's one of the elements around that contract duration that I'd love to drill in and to have you share some of your experience and expertise. Because certainly the concept of multi-year contracts is not
Right.
unique to digital realty, and not alien to that more traditional B2B technology recurring revenue contract structure. In fact, it's actually extremely common for especially the larger, even more tenured enterprise B2B technology companies who are possibly transforming and shifting
Yeah.
into becoming a recurring revenue business to say, okay, as part of this transformation, let's get everyone onto the recurring revenue model, whether that be subscription or consumption, but let's try
Yep.
to lock in multi-year contracts because that just feels more secure, more safe for us as the vendor, and maybe it's more appealing to the customers. But there are challenges and there are risks in having that versus having more of a shorter cadence around annualized contracts, both in terms of cost of opportunity around being able to drive potentially expansion, but also when faced with a, let's say, 3 year contract, let alone a 7, 8 year contract in aspects of your business, you translate that into, okay, well, what does that look like in terms of thinking customer journey, customer life cycle? I mean,
Yeah.
we use the journey word. That's a long old journey, 3 years, let alone 8 years. And throughout that journey, I think those who engage on this show, okay, we need to be thinking about how do we drive adoption, how do we drive value, recurring value during that journey, because we have this very important renewal event and we have these ideally expansion events that might happen as well. But when that renewal event is 3 years away, I look at a lot of B2B tech companies that I speak with and get insight into, and there's often a set it and forget it mentality
Mm.
around, okay, they renew in 3 years' time,
Yeah.
so we'll just move on. We'll come back to them at some point, but never mind. They're good. They're good for 3 years. We're going to go over here now. And that is riddled with risk and a lot of diving catches in the renewal cycles for those customers that do have that multi-year contract.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think curious how you see that equation and how you think about with your organization, the team you lead, and the role that you have, how you think about customer journey when you're dealing with that multi-year concept and thinking about, well, we want to make sure we drive retention of this customer at the end of that multi-year journey.
Yeah.
We want to think about potentially expansion, and how you approach that.
It's an interesting one because I mean, you're right. When you have these long leases, you in a way you're like, okay, they're going to be here for a while. I don't need to worry about them. And when I joined, it was a lot. There was a lot like that. And again, they were still calling customers tenants when I joined,
Mm.
which just killed me. So it's how do you get the internal team to start thinking more about them as customers and that their journey matters, because when eventually it comes down to that lease expiring, and we have a lot of those happening right now, or the contract expiring, um, they have an option. They can leave or stay. And then there's also the ability to, well, they might be able to expand with us now that we're global and we're in so many different countries. They have the chance to partner with us on that. So how do we, one thing that you mentioned about my organization, which is a little bit unique, is that we have customer success, we have kind of a technical account group, which maps to our top accounts, and we also have the customer experience. And what really this helps us to manage, what does that journey look like, and what are those listening posts. So that's how we measure it. You have from a life cycle standpoint, you have buy, kind of receive the space, they're using it, they're getting the services, and then eventually they'll go and renew and expand. But there's a lot in that. Like you said, it could be 3 to 10 years. So what we do is through the surveys, and we measure many different listening posts around the implementation slash onboarding, from when they buy to when they get up and live in their cage, to daily interactions with our site team. So they might need to do a remote hands piece of work to check on something in their cage, and they don't want to send someone across country to do that. So there's a lot of feedback we can get there. We have QR codes throughout our data centers, so we can capture how the experience is at the security desk. And we also do a relationship survey annually, which we capture kind of the overall, hey, how are the customers doing? So it really does help us taking this feedback and acting on it. It's a differentiator, and it helps drive change within our company. So we can use this qualitative and quantitative feedback to do that.
Yeah, super interesting, and I think the physical elements, which knowing it's not purely physical, and I think we'll get into that in a bit, but certainly the physical elements are part of the if I use the word solution that Digital Realty is providing, does certainly create some interesting opportunities to be able to drive that engagement, but also measure that engagement and see that sign of life, to create that set of leading indicators that you can track across that longer time period. Uh, the Again, when you're thinking about a multi-year period, there could be natural and I guess what I would describe as safe peaks and troughs of activity that you're describing, measuring that say, hey, this is good, that trough is fine, because we kind of expect that trough at this stage of this multi-year process. We don't expect it to be consistent at this level for I don't know however many days there are in 3 years, 3 times 365. Is that an accurate statement for Digital Realty's perspective around sort of, if we encapsulate this concept about, let's just say, measuring customer health across a 3-year period, and we're expecting that, sure, there's going to be a ramp up, but once we hit sort of adoption, that sustainment of adoption, which then might be reflected in some metrics called customer health, that should be consistent for 3 years? Or do you guys expect there to be peaks and troughs, and how does that sort of evolve over that multi-year contract duration?
Yeah, the customer health is one where it certainly does evolve, and it evolves especially as they start to when they get in with us and then they expand to other places, and all of a sudden the greater importance of global customer experience and that is so because that's one of our differentiators and our value props is in creating that global customer experience. And if they're in um, Melbourne, Australia, and they also are responsible for the data center up in New York City, they're expecting very similar processes. So we have a high level, a high bar to be able to meet that. So the health is something we certainly have to monitor. But I think what it comes down to, and this is really important, this is something in full transparency, we're on the journey, like many of my colleagues
Mm-hmm.
who are listening to this, is how do you understand, we have the health indicator, but that's maybe from our perspective. What is it from their perspective? And how do you do that? Well, you have to establish, what that ideal value is for them in the future. So how do you identify what that looks like? What is their target? Let's get it documented, and then how do you measure that progress over time? So a lot of that has to do with when we start the relationship early on, or even inherit it halfway, um, and how do we understand what are those key drivers that how they define success? Because if we're tracking that well, some of the other things might happen, but ultimately that's kind of our north star. That's where we want to drive. We want to drive to. So it's really important we get that documented. And we're on that journey right now. We have a ways to go, but we've come a long way as well.
Yep, yep. And I mean, again, just to keep sort of focusing on the timeline of 3 years, but recognizing it's not always 3 years. It may possibly could be
Yeah,
shorter. Certainly, it sounds like you've got longer scenarios as well. But if we take 3 years as a case in point, I mean that's figuratively a lifetime in certain industries, especially technology. A lot changes, a lot happens there, and therefore potentially definitions of, hey, the value I want to realize from the product or solution that I'm adopting and using and have subscribed to for this period could evolve over that period. And so there arguably isn't a definition of value to be realized on day one that is the
correct.
same definition of value on day, again, whatever number that is, 900xxx, versus day 365. Do you see that in terms of that evolution of kind of value changes, value evolves over the process or over the lifetime of that contract, and how do you sort of deal with that?
Yeah, the value does change. and it changes because the market changes, the competition
Hmm.
changes. We and including how what a we know what we continue to grow organically and inorganically. We continue to build new product sets that helps create that stickiness and the associated value with that stickiness. So and I think many times customers move in thinking they have one use case to solve, and all of a sudden they realize, wow, we can do this, this, and this, and then the value and the stakes rise. And when they do that and they start to expand with us, that's when we need to double down in ensuring we have that tight relationship with those customers around business reviews and all the things that customer success does. We like to drive and engage in with our customers.
Yeah, yeah. And I imagine another element that, again, would be fairly ripe for change and therefore need pretty proactive, um, intelligent approach from your organization's side around managing stakeholders. And again, because 3 years, I mean, I'd say it's probably rare these days, depending on industry, for anyone to
Yeah.
stay in a job for longer than a couple of years, it seems. And so over that 3 year contract period, again, the potential for stakeholder change is, I'd guess, is pretty likely, and certainly I know it is in other companies or other technology categories that have this sort of multi-year contract duration. And so the concept of stakeholder mapping, stakeholder management,
Yeah.
stakeholder tracking, very important. And when you're dealing with the size of solution and scope of solution that you have, you've got, I expect, multiple stakeholders. What is your approach around that subject, and is it something that is something that you do pay close attention to?
Well, we have to, and kind of the way that we sell too is that we have obviously the sales team, they're in a way selling to a different buyer than my team is servicing and
Mm.
supporting. So we both have stakeholders, and we have to make sure that both of our stakeholders are engaged actively and in touch. And one of the things we monitor and are looking to do an even better job with is if we don't have those engagements, whether it be a business review and executive sponsor reach out, then that health score that we talked about earlier goes to amber or in color, because that could be a risk of something when there is a change. So, and then also we have an executive sponsorship program. So we have an ELT member mapped to our top, call it 50 accounts, and then we have someone from the ops team, of which we're a part of, who's an ops exec sponsor, who are really focused on all the operational items and really mapped to the team. So the ELT sponsor, the ops sponsor, really help build those relationships and ensure that they're aligned. And when there is a change at that senior level, we have the ability to stay tight with our customers because of the processes that we have in place, given a lot of the turnover that happens.
Yeah, yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. So we get to the renewal event itself, which again is at point of acquisition of a customer.
Yeah.
It's a long way away, a year in. Well, gosh, Jesus, still 2 years away, and again, that's a long period of time in certain sort of relativities. But eventually, okay, we can start to see that renewal date on the horizon. Um, how do you engage as a team, as an organization, on that renewal event, reflecting the fact that, well, the acquisition of that customer, or at least the signing of that contract, was
Yeah.
now a long time ago. A lot has happened, and again, that could have been excellently architected and managed and driven very proactively and productively over that long time period. But still, a lot has happened. We need to now, final push here. Let's try and make sure we can get this renewal done, and as you say, maybe potentially drive some expansion as well. Not to say that has to wait for the renewal
Yeah.
event, but yeah, how does that work inside Digital Realty, considering again just this timeline we're talking about?
Yeah, well, it's and we're evolving as well. But the way
Hmm.
it works today is we have a lot of stakeholders who are involved, sales, and then we have kind of an asset management group, and that asset management group really runs the P&L of each of the sites and the properties. So ultimately, they're the ones who are responsible for the renewal, but we have a cast of characters who are there to support it. Now, what KPI that I currently have that I'm measured against is I want to have zero renewals lost to a service issue. for the accounts we support. So if a customer leaves us because, hey, your service was stinky, I didn't get the support I needed, that's really bad, and I get dinged for that. So that's really the key KPI that I have. But you're absolutely right. These things, because of data centers and how much work goes into putting infrastructure in, it's not like customers are thinking about this 3 months out. This is a long process. So we look at it from 18 months out, and it's pretty far out, but it's important. And what we've done actually is it's kind of fun. I'll tell you a little story of right when I joined back in 2017. My CFO brought me into his office in San Francisco and sat me down and said, "Mark, I need your help. We had a recent, he says, we had a recent customer that left us, and we were surprised by it." And he said, and then I asked him a little bit more why. He said, "Well, our team showed up to talk about the renewal. It was 3 months out, and the customer was kind of like, it's a little bit, too late to have this discussion. We hadn't heard from you in months, if not years. So goodbye, we're going somewhere else." And obviously that didn't sit well. And this is right when I joined Digital Realty. So what we did is we coined what we called the coffee and donuts program. Now I would have said steak and wine, but he's a CFO, so he wants to go coffee and donuts. So, and that's really enabled us and the customer success team to get involved and engaged. And we don't even want to bring up the R word, the renewal word. That's our job is to make sure that they have a really good experience up until the time of point when they want to actually sign that contract. So, and part of that success plan gets created. We look at customer business reviews, appreciation events, and a lot of things that are mapped to what that plan is to get them across the line 18 months later.
Yeah. No, some great takeaways there. I think, first of all, I certainly know of many multi-year driven, or at least have a good portion of their contract base as multi-years, who are not starting their renewal strategy 18 months out. They're not approaching it any earlier than their annual contracts in many cases, which is maybe 120 days, which is lauded as like, hey, look how proactive we are. So 18 months, it certainly sets a new benchmark. I think the point you made about sort of what your organization, as in the organization you lead specifically, Mark's accountability and sort of KPI is a really important point, because certainly I get asked all the time, should what they might brand as their CS organization own the renewal? And the way I always approach that conversation is, I think, very much kind of complemented by what you're sharing here, which is, well, there's being accountable for the customer's willingness to renew based on value realized, and ultimately sort of the experience that wraps around their journey as a customer to realize that value, versus accountability for the transaction of the renewal. And if it makes sense, and certainly where you've got a very significant contract renewal event like you always typically have, you're going to have multiple stakeholders from your side. The transaction itself is a beast and has got many complicated elements to it. Especially because you've got physical assets in as part of the equation, that it's very appropriate to probably have a separate set of stakeholders who are thinking about the transaction and getting the customer to be willing to renew based on the transaction details, price, contract structure, etc.
Right.
But then, as importantly, have a team that's accountable for that customer's willingness to renew based on value realized and experience. And I think that concept applies to many other sort of less arguably complicated or extensive contract structure based technology companies who maybe have a simpler product. It's classic SaaS and the contracts aren't as simple. But where we're thinking about, well, who owns the renewal? Well, there's two elements to think about. And certainly I've seen, and there are models where it makes sense for one team to own the willingness and the transaction, or potentially the transaction is just automated and from a RevOps perspective. And so there isn't really anyone that needs to own that per se. But too many times I see organizations not having a clear internal accountability for the first category of willingness to renew based on value realized and experience. And that being, there's an insinuation of that accountability. It's kind of why companies say, oh, that's why we have a customer success organization. But really having that clearly defined, and the key word you use, Mark, in my mind, is there's a KPI around that
Yeah.
I own, that inputs into the renewal process, I think is an important point.
Yeah, it's a and I'm okay not owning the transactional aspect because it is very legally intensive with the leases and the
Hmm.
contracts. It is not simple. So I'd rather focus on the relationship and having the teams really build the relationship with the customers, and help ideally maybe even expand that discussion. So I'm okay with that right now. One thing we did try probably 3 years ago, and it was really good because I was going through a shift in our target operating model in terms of what the role of a CSM is, because we were at one point very reactive, almost like customer service, and we actually put a spiff towards renewal. So we set it up based on like kind of renewal deal size, and that was actually really good because a lot of CSMs started to say, "Wow, I can have a play in on this, and I can get anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 if the renewal closes because these are big transactions." Once we changed that behavior, we pulled the spiff away, and and then it just became part of what their job is, and the whole KPI mentioned is what cascaded down, and they know that they held themselves accountable. But it really did help change that mentality a little bit, in terms of what our role and how we can assist with the renewal and ensuring the customer does realize their value.
Yeah, yeah, no, super interesting. So the last kind of major topic I'd love to drill into is the crux of, I think, going back to like leading indicators of that willingness to renew and thinking about ultimately tracking adoption and value realization. And again, Digital Realty being a business that has, I would say, one of the ultimate examples of a physical
Yeah,
asset and aspect to the product you're offering and driving adoption around with your customers. That concept, again, not being really that rare in overall B2B enterprise
right.
technology, in that you see a lot of vendors out there with hybrid based solutions, and they can often be a hardware element that's part of the overall package. And so we're thinking about, well, we need to drive adoption through that physical piece or the hardware, as well as the more traditional, arguably more traditional software side of the equation. You shared sort of some examples of tracking kind of usage and adoption of on the physical side. So it sounds like that, just to recap, that um, is it fair to say it's like an IoT Internet of Things set of capabilities around tracking sort of activity against these physical assets? And you mentioned QR codes. Anything else you'd call out on that front from a physical perspective?
Well, so from physical, one of the things that we track, and this is just kind of the basic of how our contracts are structured, is power. I mean, so the way it works is we get power from the energy provider in that area, and then we have to make sure we take that power we have and distribute it to all the customers there. And so it's really important with how we measure and monitor that. There's a lot of other things that go around that. Uh, the power really is the driver, and it's something that we measure and we report out during customer business reviews. And one of the things, and it could be an indicator. So if all of a sudden if there's a decrease or even a rapid decrease, it's a cause for concern. And especially if a renewal is coming up, because what that means is they're starting to take that load and moving it somewhere else. And then on the flip side, if there is the power that goes maybe above what the target SLA is for what they've contracted, then this is a good opportunity to jump in and say, hey, what's going on? What kinds of applications are you running within our environment? What are you trying to do? And it engages, the CSM starts to engage in a discussion and then brings in the sales team to help with that upsell discussion or cross sell. So kind of power utilization is probably one of the key metrics that we record and report for our customers.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think that's a really good example of, I guess, where I'm going with this is, yeah, other B2B enterprises that, again, either have that physical asset as part of their solution, or it's hardware, or it's just on-prem software. And again, a lot of the I guess language I hear back from those types of companies is, oh well, how could we track usage? How could we track adoption? It's a physical asset, or it's a piece of hardware on the customer's site, or even it's just on-prem software. And I think there's so many ways of just thinking somewhat out of the box and saying, hey, what could we measure here? What data could we get access to, either in collaboration with the customer or independently as the vendor, that has still a direct link to adoption of the solution, but isn't necessarily sort of as basic as who has clicked the button or who has opened the door or who has walked through the gate. It's just something somewhat a bit more left field. And I think that example is really a really good one. And I think is just a good testament to, if you think out of the box, there is ways of being able to very intelligently track this concept. And then I was like, you tie it to the concept of value realization, because you're able to take that data and say, hey, customer,
exactly.
Actually, we think we could optimize how you're getting value because the power is telling us this. Like, what are you doing in there? And why are you doing that? And why are you doing it that way? And that creates the value add motion as well.
Yeah. And then you talked about it too, is, a lot of what we continue to strive for is how do we provide a great overall self-service experience for our customers. And the way to do that is through a portal. And one of our challenges we've had is that we've had multiple portals because we've acquired a lot of companies, and it takes a while to integrate them all, the front end and then of course the back end systems. So it's been a challenge, and what we're looking at doing better is how do we manage adoption of that portal. But in that portal is not just kind of, hey, are they logging in? It's how do they easily interact with us, and it's all about making it easier to work with us, and that's something that we want to try and drive. And it is something that we measure, the ease of doing business. And when we are in this kind of one global portal, and we have the telemetry to monitor the usage, it will help us know who's using it. And because I think in the end, these transactional requests that go through are quicker, easier in the portal, and it just follows our process. And the other thing that the portal offers is kind of what you talked about is they can either get direct access through an API, or we have like a DSIM where they can log in and kind of see the management of their operations and be able to monitor that themselves on their own. And of course, if they can do it, we can also do it as well. So we can kind of check to see what's going on. And it's really about how do we get more advanced with using that telemetry to understand what the customers are or are not doing.
Yeah. I think that I'm glad you brought out the portal, because I wanted to drill into that as I think a good example of, again, what I think is a huge value opportunity for many other B2B enterprises out there who are thinking about driving best-in-class customer experience, value realization, managing those customers over the course of a lifetime. And the general absence of this concept of a portal that connects vendor and customer and enables to share insights from both sides and drive collaboration, which it's not some radically futuristic concept. I remember in my ERP days, there were portals that came as part of these ERP products around like Microsoft Dynamics and what have you. But you sort of fast forward to the 2020s now, and now we're here at the end of 2022, and you look at the B2B SaaS industry and certainly how these vendors are, again, managing and working with customers. The concept of a customer portal that is obviously one to many, in terms of there's one portal for all customers, but each customer has its own distinct profile and portal experience that then can be used to collaborate with that customer from a vendor perspective. It blows my mind how absent that is. And it blows my mind how, I would say, underserved that use case is by the technology vendors out there who are trying to serve this world of customer success and customer management and value engineering. There's some deal portals out there. There's solutions like ecosystems that have some of that collaborative capability of thinking about value selling and value agreement, building out those business cases and what have you. But certainly in the customer success technology world, it's very limited, in my opinion, around this layer of customer collaboration. And I think it's gonna change. I think it has to change. It makes no sense for it to exist. But it's interesting that Digital Realty is arguably ahead of the game in that regard. Was that portal, and hearing that you've kind of got multiple versions because of the corporate development history, but are these portals largely been proprietary developed, or are they products that you've kind of purchased off the shelf and are using to drive this portal experience?
It's a little bit of both. There's ones that have been developed using archaic technology, There's ones that have been developed with like one of the strong enterprise platforms on the back end, and this is just kind of a front end GUI. Then there's ones that
Right.
use the enterprise platform vendor on the back end and also use their front end as well. So you have all sort. You just have a hodgepodge of these
Yeah.
portals, which makes it challenging to then integrate. But I mean, it's funny because I don't think I shared this at the beginning, but I come from kind of been in two industries: the data center colocation industry, and then also enterprise software. So I spent a lot of
Mm-hmm.
time in enterprise software. I agree with you, Ross, in terms of like your statement around the lack of focus from a portal standpoint. It is much different here because customers rely heavily on being able to interact with us and easily getting access into our data centers. I mean, if you think about how important security is, they have to manage their access list. They have to be able to say who is coming and how long they can stay for and what kind of, I mean, they have to be able to do that easily within a portal. So we really depend on it, and it's something that we are been working very hard at, and actually starting with the customer actually this quarter on the global portal from a beta standpoint. So excited about the future of where this is going because I think it's going to dramatically change the customer experience and therefore create greater customer value.
100%, 100%. And let's call it. I think we've had systems of record, systems of insight, systems of action. I think 2023 should be the year of systems of collaboration. And I think what sounds like what you're building over there is going to be a great example. Well, Mark, I appreciate it. We'll wrap it up there. It's a really insightful conversation. Really enjoyed it. I knew it would be a fun conversation as well. For anyone who's listening and would love to maybe connect with you and maybe sort of pick your brain if you're willing, how can people best find you and connect with you?
Yeah, love it. Love these conversations. So it's actually a breath of fresh air. So thank you for letting me do it. mreynolds@digitalrealty.com is my email, and you can also search me on LinkedIn. Mark Reynolds, Digital Realty should bring me up. it's one of the top. There's not many others out there, so the best way
That's
to
good.
engage.
That's good. Good to have a differentiated name.
Yeah.
So yeah, appreciate it, Mark.
Yep.
A lot of fun. Thanks to all of you who have listened or have tuned in to watch this episode. This will be available both audio, video for anyone who's looking for copies or looking to share this recording. Check out www.valuewise.co for lots of other resources around many of the subjects that Mark and I have touched on today. But in the meantime, we'll see you again soon, and valuewise yourself, valuewise your customers, and stay well.